Imagine this. 4080 Marines cut off in hostile terrain, ammo nearly gone, enemy rifles flashing from every ridge. Command had already begun drafting the casualty report. Protocol said, wait. Protocol said, stand down. But in that moment, when silence meant certain death, one overlooked sniper refused to obey the rulebook. Today's story is about Sergeant Elena Marquez, the Marine they mocked as dead weight, who drew her own line and carried a battalion back alive. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love seeing our Army family spread across the world. The Helmand sun burned white against the endless dust, settling into every crease of gear and uniform. Inside the compound, laughter carried from the chow hall, sharp and careless, bouncing off concrete walls. It was the sound of Marines filling their stomachs and their lungs before another day of patrols. But out near the far edge of the training yard, away from the clatter of trays and the chatter of jokes, one figure sat alone, cross-legged on a tarp with a rifle stretched across her lap. Sergeant Elena Marquez, 27 years old, U.S. Marine Corps sniper, worked like clockwork, every motion neat, deliberate, unhurried. Her frame was small compared to most of the men around her, just over 5 feet and change, shoulders narrow under the desert tan blouse. Where others radiated swagger, she radiated control. She pulled a cloth through the bore, checked the bolt face, then scribbled something in a small spiral notebook balanced against her knee. Her rifle, an M40A5, wasn't a weapon to her, it was an extension of thought. She tracked every adjustment like it was scripture, clicks on the scope, humidity shifts, muzzle wear. She knew exactly how the rifle would breathe on any given day. A pair of lance corporals strolled by on their way to the barracks, glancing at her with smirks that carried the same weight as a shove. "There's the quota sniper," one muttered just loud enough for her to hear. "Paper shooter," the other replied, chuckling. "Good thing cardboard doesn't shoot back." Neither slowed down. Neither expected her to answer. Elena didn't. She just kept polishing the bolt and wrote another line in her book. She'd heard it all before: dead weight, mascot, check the box, sniper. Too small. Too quiet. Too different. Even the senior sergeants, men who had 3 deployments worth of scars, dismissed her with casual certainty. "Marquez is fine for range scores," one of them had told the company commander. "But combat? Put her on radios, keep her useful. That's it." And so they did. Support detail was her permanent assignment. Carrying gear, checking comms, running logistic spreadsheets. She wasn't asked to take positions on ridges. She wasn't asked to put her eye to the scope in real operations. She was told, politely, to stay in her lane. But what no one noticed, because no one cared enough to look, was that Elena Marquez had built her own curriculum in the silence of long nights. While others traded jokes in the smoke pit, she spread out maps under a red lens flashlight and studied the folds of terrain until they lived in her head. She kept meticulous wind charts, recording every shift at different times of day and in different valleys. She practiced trigger discipline with dry fires until her breathing was as steady as a metronome. And in her small green notebook, the one that looked like nothing more than a grocery list, she recorded everything: ballistic drop tables, environmental offsets, her own calculations done by hand in case technology failed. Each page was filled with neat handwriting, rows of numbers, arrows sketched across grid lines. It was her private doctrine, invisible to those who believed she had none. On her left forearm, usually hidden beneath the sleeve of her blouse, was a tattoo. Small, simple, the Marine sniper emblem, the scoped rifle flanked by laurel. She had earned it through sweat and precision, through a sniper school that demanded perfection and punished hesitation. But here in Helmand, she tugged her sleeve low whenever she worked. She had no interest in reminding men who already believed she didn't belong. That was the paradox of Elena Marquez. She didn't flare with anger when mocked. She didn't argue when dismissed. She didn't throw back words to prove she was worthy. She carried the insults the way she carried her rifle, quietly, carefully, with patience. She was waiting, not for permission, but for the inevitable moment when all the charts and calculations, all the discipline and scars would no longer be invisible. Her story didn't begin in Helmand. It began in South Texas, where the evening smelled of dust and mesquite, and the horizon stretched wide over flat farmland. Her father, a Marine who had deployed twice before injuries forced him home, raised her with the discipline of the Corps even when the nearest barracks was hundreds of miles away. Chores at dawn, fence repairs before breakfast. And at dusk, when the sky bruised purple, he would line up soda cans on fence posts and hand her a battered hunting rifle. "Steady breath," he'd tell her. "Slow trigger. Let the shot surprise you." By 12, she could drop every can at 50 yards without blinking. By 16, she outshot most of the men who came to the farm to hunt. Her father said little, but his eyes always carried a quiet pride. When he passed unexpectedly in her senior year, Elena joined the Marines not just to honor his memory, but to test whether she could carry the same discipline he had drilled into her bones. She carried it well enough to earn a sniper's slot, an achievement few women reached and fewer were acknowledged for. But in Helmand, achievements on paper mattered less than the perception of those already entrenched in their opinions. And so she carried her rifle to the range and her notebooks to her bunk, enduring the murmurs, building her knowledge while others built their swagger. The compound itself was a bubble of routine. Patrols going out, reports coming in, Marines filing through chow lines, endless briefings with the same clipped phrases. Elena floated at the edges of that current, noticed but not valued. And then came the orders. 480 Marines, reinforced by attachments, were to move into a valley believed to be lightly held. The intel brief painted it as a routine sweep, secure and clear, hold for stabilization. Maps showed ridgelines and open ground, predictable routes. Command presented it as straightforward. Elena, sitting at the back of the briefing room with her notebook balanced on her thigh, saw it differently. The contour lines screamed danger, narrow approaches. High ground on 3 sides. Kill zones waiting to be lit. She raised her hand once, quietly. "Sir," she said, voice even, "this valley, have we considered the risk of it being a deliberate trap? The folds here?" She pointed at the map projected on the wall. "They could mask a significant enemy presence." "It fits too cleanly." The colonel leading the briefing barely glanced at her. "Sergeant, track equipment, not strategy." "That's above your pay grade." A few chuckles rippled through the room. "Dead weights talking tactics now," one Marine whispered. Elena closed her notebook, said nothing more. When the briefing ended, the Marines filed out, adjusting helmets, slinging rifles, cracking jokes about how quick the mission would be. Elena watched from the edge of the room as they gathered gear, climbed into transports, and rolled toward the mouth of the valley. 480 Marines, moving as doctrine required, carrying the confidence of men who had not yet seen how quickly doctrine could turn into a trap. She remained behind, on support detail. Her orders were simple: monitor comms, track supply movements, stay clear of operational lanes. It was what she had always been told, what she had been trained to accept. But as the dust of departing vehicles drifted across the compound, and as their silhouettes shrank against the horizon, Elena Marquez felt the weight of every number she had written in her notebooks, every line she had traced across maps in the silence of midnight. She had seen this valley long before the orders came down. She had imagined exactly how it would close, and now, with 480 Marines rolling into its jaws, she was left behind. C. The morning after the orders, the briefing room hummed with the easy bravado of men who believed the map would obey them. Elena took her usual place near the back, notebook balanced on her thigh, pencil tucked behind one ear. The colonel dragged a red dot across a projected valley. Ridges, approaches, hold sites, clean on the wall, messier in reality. When he paused for questions, she lifted her hand with the same unhurried steadiness she used on the trigger. "Sir, the valley's a trap," she said. "These folds create intersecting fields. If they seed machine guns on the spurs and RPG teams in the draw, our convoys will be stuck in a bowl." He never followed her pointer. He followed her name tape. "You're here to carry radios, not give strategy." Laughter rippled. A private pantomime taking notes and winked at his buddy. Elena's fingers whitened against the cardboard back of her notebook, then relaxed. The colonel clicked onward, and the red light washed her from the frame. On the range the next morning, the wind ran quartering left to right, just enough to turn easy shots into honest ones. Elena laid prone, let the world narrow into reticle and heat, and dialed her dope. Breath in, breath out. Steel rang, steady and indifferent. Luck, a young private muttered behind her when the 500 plate jumped. A gunnery sergeant spat dust. Clay pigeons don't shoot back, he drawled. And paper doesn't scream. She logged each shot by habit distance, wind, hold, impact, and stripped the rifle to zero without defending herself. In the mess hall, trays squealed along rails. Elena sat, and the 4 Marines across from her stood in practiced unison, scraping chairs, migrating to a distant table. "Babysitter with a rifle," someone said, not bothering to whisper. She ate anyway, jaw even, spoon quiet against the bowl. The only sound she allowed herself later was the scratch of a pencil in her notebook, thickening the contour lines where the valley pinched like a fist. On base patrol near the motor pool, 2 SEALs walked past with the relaxed symmetry of men who measure each other by details. A few Marines from Elena's company clustered by a Humvee and watched her adjust an antenna. "Dead weight," one announced, as if publishing helpful intel. "Never seen a sniper afraid to deploy." One SEAL's mouth tilted at the corner. Another made a sound halfway between a breath and a chuckle. Elena finished the radio check, logged the serial, and moved on. Insults graduated from whispers to lines to names that tried to staple reality in place. Meanwhile, 480 Marines rolled toward the valley. For a while, the radios ticked with comforting admin position reports, route checks, fuel status. The drone feed showed convoy dots moving down a dirt finger, heat shimmy turning the picture fluid. The first change came as a skipped beat. A convoy report didn't arrive. Then 2 voices over each other, edges frayed. Someone called for dismounts. Someone else swore at an engine that wasn't the problem. Then the sound you learn to hear once and never forget, the bend in a man's voice when the world ahead of him detonates. "Contact! Contact!" Static swallowed the rest. Another net, "Taking fire East Ridge." A third voice tried for a report and mangled it into breath. The feed bloomed with signatures. Muzzle flashes stitched angry commas along the ridges. Smoke pulsed from the draw. The convoy dots compressed and froze. Conversations thinned to murmurs. The watch officer lowered his headset and stared at nothing, as if sight alone could will the feed to change. A lieutenant reached for a checklist, skimmed it, and found no line for what the screen was showing. Chairs ceased scraping. The room recalibrated to a soundscape breath, clicking cursors, a generator, and to one phrase repeated like a shield, "Hold position, wait, follow protocol." "Too hot," a major said, voice relieved to find the wording. "No air support within 200 meters. A captain repeated it louder, as if volume turned caution into action. "Rules are clear. We hold outside the bubble." On a side monitor, a helmet camera showed dust crawling over grass and the horizon jumping with breath. Rounds nipped dirt around boots. Bearings got shouted without conviction. Elena drifted closer to the back rail, eyes on the drone angle that caught the eastern spur just wrong enough to glance the crown of a gun pit. She counted bursts and mapped traverse in her head. She read wind in the shape of smoke. The colonel asked for options. The major recited the book. "We need them to bound out of the ring, then we can bring steel." His tone made the weight sound like a plan. "They can't bound," a captain said, quiet, honest. "Then they hold," the major answered, grateful to have a sentence. The laughter from earlier had no citizenship here. Men who had smirked now worked at looking busy. Jokes withered into silence. Elena put her hand on the canvas of her rifle case. The familiar drag of leather under her palm steadied her in a way that had nothing to do with defiance. On the feed, the machine gun on the eastern spur began walking bursts down a gully where Marines tried to crawl low enough to vanish. An RPG team in the draw shifted for a clear shot, knees digging into the slope. "Too hot," the major said again, clinging to the phrase. Nobody's asking to drop ordnance, Elena said finally. A rifle will do. The colonel turned a fraction, not enough to count his attention. We are not authorizing anything that violates the 200-meter rule. It's not an authorization problem, she said. It's geometry. Give me a position and time, and I will cut their anchors without touching ours. A captain let out a dry laugh that broke in the middle. You'll solve a battalion fight with a scoped opinion, Sergeant? Stay in lane. From the doorway, the same lance corporal who liked the nickname contributed his chorus line. Deadweight wants a field trip. Radios made new sounds, the flattened syllables of men who have found the edge. A squad leader worked to climb from panic to command and slipped. Command, this is Bravo. We are pinned. Casualties mounting. We cannot push. We cannot pull back. We need. The colonel asked for artillery deconfliction. The answer arrived late and wrong for the angles. Smoke got suggested and dismissed. The wind would weaponize it against the pinned. The drone hopped angles and landed on a frame that showed just enough of the pit on the spur to make Elena's palms itch. Dust coughed from the muzzle. The traverse ticked like a metronome. She knew the space between pulses. She knew the gap her bullet needed. She unzipped the rifle case. The sound was small, but a first sergeant near the door still looked up, ready to police something. The M40A5 came free with the honest heft of steel and glass. She checked the bolt by feel, locked a magazine, and shouldered the sling. I can end this, she whispered. She said it for the steel and for the muscle memory of obedience that tried to pull her back to the wall. It had kept her quiet for months. Sergeant, the first sergeant said, defaulting to venue authority. Where are you going with that? Out, she said. Before the next word landed, a call sign she knew cut off mid-sentence. Another voice stumbled in, gulping air. 200-meter rule stands, the colonel repeated, as if the invocation itself produced cover. No one moved. The men who had laughed looked at their hands. The ones who had whispered found nothing worth saying. Officers rearranged procedures. The monitors continued stating a fact that did not care whether anyone was comfortable hearing it. Elena slung the rifle. Elena looked from screen to door and back again. The angles out there were wrong, but not unsolvable. The distances were harsh, but not outside the rifle's envelope. She pictured a shallow saddle on the near ridge and a firing lane raked through the anchors, 2 shots to break the geometry, a third to keep it broken. No one asked her plan. No one asked anything. The room had decided that waiting was safer than deciding. She had been patient. She had been silent. She had written doctrine in notebooks no one read. The valley was asking the oldest question, and she knew the answer. She breathed once and spoke for a third time, softer, steadier. I can end this. They ignored her. Elena didn't wait for permission. She walked out of the command center with her rifle slung across her chest, helmet clipped low, and jaw set like iron. No one followed. No one stopped her. The men who had mocked her sat in silence, watching the feed, content to let rules write an obituary for 4080 Marines. She moved through the compound like a shadow, past Humvees coated in dust and stacks of crates that smelled of fuel and sweat. Her boots struck the earth with a rhythm steadier than her heartbeat. In her vest pocket, her father's old dog tag knocked softly against her chest with every step. The metal was worn thin from years of his service and months of hers, the letters fading but not forgotten. At the edge of the compound, she checked her load, suppressed M40A5 across her shoulder, extra mags tight in their pouches, rangefinder clipped to her belt, and notebook pages folded into a plastic sleeve tucked near her heart. She had everything she needed, not for glory, not for protocol, but for geometry and survival. The climb to the Overwatch Ridge was brutal. Loose shale shifted underfoot, and the slope fought her with every stride. She kept her body low, moving with the patience of someone who had rehearsed this kind of approach in her head 1,000 times. Her face collected dust, her sleeves stained against rock. But she kept going, steady as her breathing, until she reached the crown of a ridge that bent just enough to hide her silhouette. She lay prone, settled the bipod, and let the world shrink into her scope. The valley below was chaos made visible. Marines huddled behind smoking vehicles, pinned under sheets of fire from every direction. Muzzle flashes peppered the ridges. RPG teams shifted positions, searching for angles. Dust rose in violent clouds where rounds chewed earth. The battalion was being eaten alive in slow motion. Elena pressed her cheek to the stock. Her crosshairs steadied on a machine gun nest 900 meters out, perched in a rocky spur. The gun chewed fire in steady rhythm, pinning an entire squad flat in the dirt. She exhaled. The reticle froze. She pressed. The suppressed crack rolled into the valley like a whisper. A fraction of a second later, the machine gunner collapsed, the weapons stuttering silent. For a heartbeat, the valley paused. Marines lifted their heads, confused. Then the radios erupted. "Who's shooting? Command, do we have air cover?" "Negative, no CAS cleared." Elena chambered the next round, eyes already shifting. A second target presented itself, an RPG team, one man steadying the launcher, the other feeding a rocket. They crouched barely 70 meters from a pinned squad, the tube angled toward a smoking Humvee. Elena measured the arc, read the wind off the smoke, and fired. The gunner folded before he could squeeze the trigger. The rocket clattered harmlessly into the dirt. Marines on the ground shouted over the net, "What the hell? Who the hell's covering us?" She didn't answer. She just moved, crawling forward 3 meters to shift her angle, dragging herself low so that her outline merged with the rocks. The enemy reacted quickly. Sniper glints sparked from the opposite ridge, sweeping the slope like searching flashlights. Elena pressed flat, heartbeat calm, fingers tracing the dirt until she felt its coolness settle her. She slid sideways, inch by inch, until she found a new position behind a scatter of stone. She propped the rifle again, scope swinging toward the valley's northern lip. She worked methodically. Each shot was not about killing, but about cutting threads. One command node collapsed mid-order, his squad scattering leaderless. A machine gunner on the western slope jerked back from his tripod, the line of fire broken. A squad leader rallying fighters vanished into dust, leaving their charge sputtering. Every trigger pull wasn't just subtraction, it was addition. Each gap widened, each silence lengthened, each Marine bought a few more breaths. The kill box began to unravel. On the net, confusion turned to realization. This isn't air. This is a rifle. Who's got Overwatch? Eyes left, something's cutting the spurs. Elena's breathing slowed. Her world narrowed to geometry, distance, wind, time. She let the scope swing, calculated holdovers in a blink, and executed without hesitation. Her sleeve rode up as she shifted positions, the cloth snagging on rock. For the first time in months, the tattoo on her forearm glared in the open, the Marine sniper emblem. Clear, undeniable, earned. Not a decoration, not a mistake, an identity. Her scars, too, caught the light. Thin white lines along her knuckles, old burns that had never fully faded. They spoke of a past she hadn't shared, missions written into her skin that others had chosen to erase from her record for the sake of politics. But now those scars spoke louder than any dismissal. "Command, do you see this?" a lieutenant on the ground shouted. "We've got a ghost on Overwatch." And then a new voice, grizzled and unmistakable, cut into the net, the SEAL commander who had been moving with the battalion. "Call sign check," he barked. "Who the hell's firing cover?" Elena didn't answer. But someone else did, someone on the operations net who had access to her personnel file. "Phantom 7, a comms tech whispered, astonished. "It's Phantom 7. The net went silent for a moment, the kind of silence that means every single person is listening. The commander's tone shifted from suspicion to awe. "Wait, Phantom 7, that's Elena Marquez." A stunned pause followed. Then a Marine's voice, breathless, "No way. Dead weight is Phantom 7? And suddenly the battlefield itself seemed to hold its breath. Because Phantom 7 wasn't a name they mocked, it was a call sign whispered in sniper school, tied to impossible shots and unconfirmed distances. A reputation built before politics had shoved her into the background. The colonel back in the command room went rigid, staring at the feed, at the rifles flicker in the dust. Realization crept over his face like a shadow. The support detail nobody wanted was the only one holding the battalion together. Elena ignored it all. She kept firing. Her scope danced ridge to ridge, carving open seams where there had been only walls. The kill box was becoming a corridor, the valley shifting from tomb to exit. She never raised her voice, never claimed credit. She just pressed trigger after trigger, each shot an answer to the doubt that had shadowed her for months. And in that moment, every Marine who had laughed at her, every sergeant who had dismissed her, every officer who had kept her on the sidelines, watched as Sergeant Elena Marquez, Phantom 7, rewrote the battlefield one round at a time. The valley that had seemed like a coffin just hours earlier now churned with the thunder of rotor blades. Dust spiraled into choking clouds as the first helicopters dropped into the corridor Elena had carved with her rifle. Marines stumbled and sprinted toward the landing zones, some dragging wounded brothers, others covering with the last rounds they had left. Every one of them knew that the difference between a massacre and a miracle was a single rifle hidden on the ridge. Elena stayed prone, scope fixed, her cheek pressed to the stock. Each helicopter arrival brought a new target. A muzzle flash too close to the LZ, an enemy fighter sprinting for a last shot at vengeance, a shadow moving where there shouldn't have been one. She cut them down with the same cold patience she had shown on the range. Half-second squeezes, controlled breathing. The radio crackled with something she hadn't heard all day. Hope. First chalk is up. Taking aboard the wounded. Second bird inbound, corridor holding. Command, this is Trident Actual. Phantom 7 has us covered. Repeat, Phantom 7 has us covered. Her call sign passed like electricity through the net. Voices steadied. Marines who had been gasping now spoke with clipped efficiency. The fight shifted from survival to extraction. The SEAL commander's voice, steady now, broke the tension with formal weight. All units, report accountability. One by one, squads checked in. At first, there were gaps, silence where names should have been. Then voices filled those spaces. Bravo secured. Charlie accounted for. Delta moving to Bird. When the last squad leader called in, the commander exhaled into the net. All 4080 accounted for, 0 left behind. The words hit harder than any gunfire. 0 left behind. An outcome nobody in that command room had believed possible when the first ambush detonated. Elena didn't celebrate. She cycled the bolt, scanned the ridges one last time, and tracked each helicopter until it lifted clear. Only when the final rotor blurred into the sky did she slide the safety on and ease her cheek from the stock. Her hands were steady, her face expressionless. The climb down was slower, every step heavy with fatigue she wouldn't show. By the time she reached the edge of the compound, the helicopters were already arriving, battered Marines spilling out, medics rushing forward. Dust coated everything in the color of bone, but something else coated the air now, silence. Not the silence of fear or dismissal, the silence of respect. Marines lined the path back into the compound. No laughter. No smirks. Helmets tucked under arms, eyes fixed on her as she walked past. Men who had shifted away from her in the mess hall now stood still, shoulders squared, acknowledging without words. She felt their eyes but didn't seek them. She carried her rifle at her side, sling cutting across her chest, boots leaving prints in the dust. At the far end of the line stood the colonel. His posture was regulation perfect, his jaw tight. When she stopped in front of him, the weight of the compound seemed to hang in the space between them. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said, voice sharp enough to slice the silence. Elena stood at attention, rifle resting against her leg. "Yes, sir." The pause stretched. The men around them held their breath. Then the colonel's voice softened, breaking under something older than doctrine. "You saved a battalion." The words hung like a verdict. For the first time, his eyes actually met hers, not her name tape, not her file. Before she could respond, another figure stepped forward, the SEAL commander. Dust streaked his uniform, grime on his helmet, eyes bloodshot from hours of combat. He came to a halt in front of her. raised his hand in a sharp salute, and held it with the kind of gravity that turned a gesture into a monument. "Phantom 7, he said, voice formal but heavy with sincerity. "The valley owes you." The Marines behind him shifted. Helmets came off. Some lowered their heads. Others whispered, voices barely audible but carrying in the silence. "She carried us." "Dead weight saved the battalion." "No, Phantom 7 did." The stillness broke into an ovation. Not the wild cheers of celebration, but the deep, resonant sound of men acknowledging something greater than themselves. Hands clapped, boots stomped, voices murmured in reverence. Elena didn't smile. Didn't gloat. She simply lowered her eyes and said, "I was just doing my duty, sir." The colonel nodded once, slow and deliberate, as though the motion itself admitted how wrong he had been. The SEAL commander dropped his salute and extended a hand. She shook it, her grip firm, her scars visible against his calloused palm. For Elena, it wasn't vindication. It wasn't even relief. It was accuracy. She had done what her training demanded, what her father's lessons had prepared her for, what her notebooks had whispered in the quiet of long nights. She had seen the geometry, and she had solved it. The ovation continued behind her as she walked toward the armory. The dog tag on her chest tapped against her vest with each step, steady as a heartbeat. She slipped inside, set her rifle on the bench, and began the methodical ritual of stripping it down, cleaning it, logging every shot in her notebook. The numbers mattered. The method mattered. The recognition was noise. But outside those walls, something had shifted forever. The Marines who had mocked her would never again call her dead weight. The officers who had dismissed her would never again ignore her hand in a briefing. The silence that had once been filled with jeers was now filled with respect too heavy to be voiced. And for the battalion, the story would live in the only way stories ever truly live, retold by men who had been there. "We should have died in that valley," they would say. But Phantom 7 was watching. True courage, the narrator's voice reminds us, often hides behind quiet patience. It doesn't roar. It waits, steady and unseen, until the moment the world finally needs it. And when it arrives, it doesn't ask for recognition. It simply does its duty, and in doing so, changes everything. One sniper, overlooked and doubted, refused to let protocol bury 480 Marines. Her shots rewrote fate, turning a kill box into a corridor of survival. Sergeant Elena Marquez proved that patience and discipline can change history when courage refuses to stay silent. If this story moved you, honor her sacrifice by saluting in the comments below. Tell us, where are you watching from tonight? And don't forget, subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so these tales of duty, valor, and sacrifice are never forgotten. Your voice keeps their legacy alive.